Cenk is the host of The Young Turks, which is seen on Current TV, who are here with us today, and we're very grateful for that. Oh, yeah, we'd like to see the band. No, there's one PowerPoint today in this panel. Thanks, Daniel. He is also the main host and co-founder of the progressive internet and radio talk show of the same name, The Young Turks, or TYT. It's the largest news show in the internet, so I probably don't have to introduce him because over 30 million views a month and over 500 million and counting total views worldwide of The Young Turks on the YouTube channel, which is where we're streaming today, also on our site. Last year, he launched Wolfpack, a political action committee formed to urge state legislatures to pass resolutions calling for a constitutional convention, an idea that we heard about this morning as well. And Cenk earned his law degree at Columbia, and he and his wife welcomed their second child a little over a month ago, and so we are particularly pleased and frankly a little bit surprised that he's here with us today. Please welcome Cenk Uygur.
You're not alone in being surprised. So is my wife. All right. First of all, I just want to say what a great conference this has been. Being a talk show host, I like to think that I know a lot, but I've actually learned a ton today. I think it's been incredibly informative. I hope we continue that for you guys in this panel. I'm ecstatic to hear more and more about Bilotti. Case that I've been screaming about for a couple of years, and it's great to hear everybody talking about it. I think Citizens United was basically shooting a dead horse. I think Bilotti shot the horse in the first place. So it's good to see that people are recognizing the fact that corporations were giving these speech rights and able to contribute on a massive scale to politics is what caused the problem in the first place. I think there's a lot of different ways to solve that. Obviously, amendments been discussed. There's something that hasn't been discussed is shareholder rights and giving them more power so they can limit what political spending that corporations do. It's just been touched on. It should be discussed more. Here, we're going to talk about legislative solutions, and there's some terrific legislative proposals as well. I just want to say that from my perspective, really quickly, as was mentioned, I started Wolfpack because I happen to think that a constitutional amendment is absolutely necessary. There's two things that amendment does. It ends corporate personhood, and it does public financing of elections. Now, now I understand from some of the speakers and others that I've discussed with that ending corporate personhood entirely, and in my amendment it says that they have no constitutional rights, is a bit of a nuclear option. To which I say, great. Now, that is not to the exclusion of other ideas, whether they're liberal, libertarian, or conservative ideas. I would love to have a convention, and that is what we're pushing for, where everybody would get to propose their different ways of ending the corruption. So it's a convention to end corruption, which I think a great majority of the country can get behind. And that is why I'm also very hopeful about these legislative solutions, because there's one thing that this divided country agrees on, which is that our politics is corrupted by money. As Professor Lessig showed you, 75% of Americans believe that that is the case. I've seen, of course, polls that get into the 84 or 85% range as well. So we all agree. Now, it seems like an incredibly hard fight no matter which way you go in this. And just let me give you a quick sense of the problem before we get to the solution. I think it's so deep that we have, in effect, lost our democracy. Now, to the person who is not familiar with all the details of that, it might sound rather harsh. But is it really harsh when 93% of the time in Congress, the person with more money wins the election? Now, what is not determinative is whether that person is a Republican or a Democrat. What is not determinative is whether they are a liberal or a conservative. What is not determinative is any of their ideas or ideology. What is most determinative is how much money they have. If they have more money, they win the election. So you tell me what decides the election. Is it the votes? Is it democracy? Or is it the money? And I think that Most Americans know that in their bones. Republicans call it crony capitalism. We call it corporate corruption, but it's the same thing by different names. And it has gotten so deep that, for example, again on an issue that Professor Lessig brought up this morning, on climate change, there was just a poll done where 67% of Americans said politicians need to do something about climate change. They need to take legislative action. Only 25% said, no, don't do anything. 67 to 25, if we had a functioning democracy, well, there would be immediate action on that. But in reality, there is not a peep, not just from the Republican candidate who brags about how his energy policy is written by the energy companies, the oil and coal companies, but by the Democratic candidate. And by the way, also very importantly, the people that profit the most from this corrupt system, television stations. Where does all that money go? A great majority of it goes to TV ads. So then are you surprised that there were no questions about corruption in any of the debates? There was no questions about climate change. There was no questions that in any way challenged the supremacy of corporations that raise that money and then hand it over to those same TV companies. So we do not have a functioning democracy. That is why we lose on climate change, even though the great majority of the American people are with us. The great majority of the American people believe that Social Security and Medicare should not be cut under any circumstances. Again, in the 80s, high 70s, overwhelming. It should never be discussed in a democracy. Which politician in their right mind, if they thought the voters decided the elections, would go ahead and propose something that 84% of the country is opposed to? They would never do that if we had a democracy, if the votes were the thing that mattered most. But it isn't. What matters most and what determines the elections more than anything else, about 93% of the time, is who has more money. We must change that system in order to save our democracy. Now, as I said, there are many different ways to do it. We're going to find out some of those on the panel today, but I want to leave you on a note of optimism for my portion here, which is that we've got at least 3/4 of the country on our side on this issue. 3/4 of the country, in the long run, is not going to lose. We are going to win. The only question is when and how. That 75% of the country is dying for a vehicle to clean up this corruption. They're waiting for somebody or some organization to say, here's how you do it. Here's how you get your power back, and you take it back from the people that are spending the money to buy your politicians and to buy your government. And here's what they're going to say when they see that. Hell yes. Liberals are going to say it. Conservatives are going to say it. Libertarians are going to say it. You know, people worry what happens in a convention. You need 3/4 of the states to ratify any amendment, no matter what happens in a convention. The only thing that 3/4 of the country agrees on is money has corrupted our politics, and we're going to put an end to it. If you want to find out more about our strategy, it's wolf-pack.com, wolf-pack.com.